panel coming up next is on mid-Spanish period, and this is being moderated by Dr. Michael Bevacqua. Let me give you some information about Dr. Bevacqua. He is an independent scholar of Chamorro history and language. With his brother Jack, they run the Guam Bus that publishes books, comics, and other learning materials that promote the Chamorro language and history. Let's welcome Dr. Bevacqua.
Sejus masi Levan, and sejus masi no todos hamzu, sejus masi purifanatan midzu pogo, Palestina Conferencia. Half a day to everyone, and thank you for joining the Marianas History Conference. And so I am excited to be the moderator for this panel on mid-Spanish history. And so for those of you who are familiar with Guam history, Marianas history, you're also familiar with the fact that the Spanish portion of Guam's history it remains one of the least developed, especially in the popular imagination. And so I'm very excited to see people producing more research, bringing more things to light about that period. And so we have three panelists today. We have Pedro, we have Alex, and then we have Rocky. And so let me get around to introducing each of them. And then I'm hoping if you have any questions for our panelists, then please send them to me. And then at the end of it, we can get to those. Each panelist will have 20 minutes to do their presentations. And so first off, we will have Pedro Gutierrez, who is presenting Fortifications as Geometric Machines, Marianas during the early modern period. He's an associate professor of the History of Art Department at the University of Seville. He received his PhD in the History of Art from that institution. And he has been working in Mexico, Florence, the Philippines. He has a number of articles that talk about architecture in the Philippines. And so it'll be very exciting to see what he can bring into the conversation around architecture in the early Spanish period of the Marianas. And so Pedro Sejus Masi, thank you for joining the Mariana History Conference.
Thank you very much. It is a pleasure for me to share with you the information about your heritage, about our heritage in Marianas. I don't know if I can share my presentation. Yes, I think. Let me. Yes, I have to open my presentation. Yes. Well, I have slightly changed the detail of the presentation because after the research I could do, I saw that there is a very interesting thing in the Marianas heritage that should be underlined. Of course, fortifications are always an exercise of geometry, and this is a required element for any military engineer. But the problem in Marianas is that there is no engineers until a very late date. And for this reason, it is interesting how the governors or the communities in Marianas took a role that it is not usual at all in the rest of the colonial empires, not only the Spanish one. For this reason, I changed in the very last minute the detail of the presentation, trying to underline that the Marianas communities were trying to defend the empire, but without the support of the empire, without the skillful military engineers or the trained people to design these forts in a considering their point of view from a perfect or an updated perspective. So I will try to review in a very quick presentation the history of fortification in the island that had been widely researched in the past, but that now we can provide some new information about several faults. First of all, I would like to thank Carlos Madrid, David Atienza, and other colleagues that are pushing me to move from Philippine history, which is what I have been doing in the last decade, to Marianas history. And I'm very happy of dealing with this interesting island. So my objective in these minutes is to demonstrate that defensive structures emerge from Western theories on the one hand, despite its marginal consideration and, of course, the lack of engineers. What is, again, I underline this, a very, very rare case if you compare it with the rest of the Spanish Empire or even the other European empires in Southeast Asia. Well, during the 17th century, very few details are preserved about the fortification in the island, and probably not much was built. We know about a castle or a tower that was built to protect the Spanish against the European threat, but also against local communities, what is an exception if you compare this with the early text in other Spanish settlements of the time. And this was built around 1668. If you read the text or you try to understand what they are trying to prove, it is a typical medieval conception, but in a very late moment. There is no engineers, there is no way of updating the proposal, and they try to solve the defense of this little settlement in a very old-fashioned manner. But this is an interesting case to see how these Spanish communities tried or understood fortification without a trained or a skillful person working on it. If you see this map that you probably know from the French National Library, you will see that there is no fortification indicated in the entire map, because probably not even this little tower would be enough to be included. Much more is known about Guadalupe fort, which was already published, and it's known to be that had been built in 1683. But for me here, my contribution is trying to see this fort in perspective, trying to see if this is an interesting contribution from Marianas or just another not updated piece. It is true that this star forts can be found in Italy and Spanish territories from the end of the 16th century. And one of the oldest out of Europe was designed for Manila in the very late 16th century. You have a good number of them in the Caribbean, for example. But the thing is, if you have a wide view of which sort of fortification were built in the Caribbean, for example, at this moment in 1680s, you will see that most of the best or the most important ports of the empire were defended with this sort of forts. We have two cases. For example, Havana fortification was improved with other little forts around the port, and they built one star fort in Matanzas. This is San Severino that you can see at the right, and in Cartagena, probably the second biggest port in the Spanish Carrera de Indias, Juan de Somovilla designed another fort called San Luis de Boca Chica to protect the entrance of the bay. So, despite the lack of engineers in Marianas, they were proposing a completely updated option. And I'm not going to go in detail, but this is a perfectly designed star fort. What is not easy, if you compare this with other forts of this sort designed by not skillful technicians, you will see a lot of errors. But here, the proposal is perfect compared with those published in contemporary treatises. So at this moment, Marianas provided a perfect example. You can compare it with any of contemporary designs of the time. At the end of the 17th century in Marianas, we have this, well, before going further, there is a curious thing about this fort for Marianas that I think that has not been sufficiently underlined. It is which kind of gunnery was used, because this sort of fort was designed to host a wide range of cannons, and this is if you analyze them from a geometrical point of view, this is the best way of using them. But in this case, if you see which sort of gunnery they had, most of it is arquebuses, muskets, and blunderbusses. So the shoot range, which is from 1 kilometer to 3 kilometers in the case of cannons, low until 1 kilometer maximum in the case of muskets. So the geometric perspective of the fort changed, and we will see how this is important in other Marianas forts. Another fort that was probably built in the late 17th century, but we have nothing or not too much information, is a battery in Salupat River that was published before, and I'm not going to stop here. Much more interesting is the plans of San Luis in Apra, where you can see, I don't know if you can see my point, but you probably know this map where you can find this battery, this San Luis Fort, which is not a very, geometrically speaking, a very complex structure. But the interesting thing is that if you compare the map with the cannons that they had here, you can see that this is very practical. It is very useful because you can control exactly this part, which is the entrance of the and where the ships could enter. So it is not interesting to control this part, which has no sense, or even worse, this part, but this. And this is perfectly achievable with the cannons that they had in this fort. What we can say is that this is the typical solution from military governor or a person with some experience in siege or some kind of war, but it is not the usual way of dealing with this geographical context from a military engineer of the time. But this is interesting as a case where you can see how other military population dealt with a similar problem. You see other maps of the time and how Fort San Luis was preserved a long time without any other defense from the center of the bay. Most of these fortifications, both in Hagåtña and in Apra, were completely reformed in the late 18th century, and most of these plans were already known. And you know the change of San Fernando, this star, well, first this star fort we present previously, but was changed to a little battery, which is San Fernando, and finally went to San Rafael, Santa Águeda, and finally Santa Cruz, which were completely rebuilt in 1794. And we have a good number of plans of little changes in this structure in the early 19th century. I'm not going to stop too much on them. Here you can see Santa Águeda or San Rafael in a map, French map of the early 19th century. Well, this is the current situation, just to confirm how this little structure, now with a completely different concept of defense, just a little structure could defend an entire city. You have to know much better which is the position, which is the distance, which is the shot range of this moment gunnery, and this is a good design of fortification can be enough against an European or an international attack. We can stop in the design of every structure, but at the end you will see that almost all forts have the same design, because this is a problem when you have a military engineer trying to provide a good design. He or she tried to accommodate the design to the problem and to the geographical space. But if you don't have these skills, you have to provide a common and homogeneous solution that can be useful for almost every problem. And this is the reason of how almost all the preserved structures or known structure of the early 19th century in Guam are almost the same fort with different dimensions. And we can see here, for example, San Rafael or Santa Cruz in different position in the island, but at the end it's almost the same battery. Or even it is the same conception with very little changes, the case of Santiago in Orote. Much more interesting, and I'm going to finish with this, is how San Jose in Umatac, how Umatac was developed along the 18th and 19th century, because it is a very complex bay in terms of fortification with different stages that fortunately we could date in detail. For example, we now know that Santo Angel was built in 1756, San Jose was built in 1803, and Soledad in the first years of the 19th century. And this is probably the first image of how this defense was designed. And we can see that most of the cases I have cited are just batteries. This is the usual way of depicting little batteries. We can see these two batteries, and much more interesting is this hemispherical battery that was San Jose. Is a typical very late 18th century solution in the rest of the Spanish settlement. If we see this map of 1819, we see that San Jose was built. And the interesting thing is how the original design of Santo Angel appeared. And here we have the details, and I can't stop, but here we can see how a clear example of a mid-18th century structure, if you compare this with the rest of the Caribbean or the Southeast Asian cases, this is the typical structure that was designed at this moment, but transformed as other cases in the Caribbean transformed along the second half of the 18th century and the early 19th century. On the contrary, these little batteries, Carmen and Soledad, which are not usual in the 18th century, and we could demonstrate that in fact they weren't built in the 18th century, but in the 18th. And here we have the last examples, well, the same example, but with plan of the 19th century. This is San Jose de Umatac. I know they are published, but here you can see in colors, which are, I think, much more interesting, and we have much more details. This is Soledad, which is still preserved, and this is Santa Barbara, and Santo Angel, as it was in the early 19th century. Here is a little detail of how Umatac was in the early 19th century, but with Spanish sources. Well, that's all. As I said at the beginning, here we can see how the governors in Marianas, with the local communities, which all the sources underline the importance of local communities in building, in designing this structure, without the work of a Spanish military engineer, how they were updated and how they were able to provide interesting solution that allowed to defend the island against different threats that had during the 18th and the 19th century. So thank you very much. And if you have any question, here I am.
Sidus Masi. Thank you so much, Sidus Masi. And I have to apologize because I read your name the incorrect way. So Luengo. Pedro Luengo Gutierrez. And so I'm so sorry about that. And so, but thank you so much for that. And I know that some people were messaging and really amazed at sort of the images that you were bringing out and sort of bringing to life and providing history in some of the places that people on Guam pass by every day. And so I appreciate that. And if you have any questions, remember, put them into the chat, and then we'll have a chance after our three presenters have presented to get to them. But Sidus Masi Tatlo, Pedro.